Everyone assumes composite bows were weaker than European longbows. Popular history tells us that Eastern archers used small, curved bows because they lacked the strength or resources for real war bows. The logic seems obvious: a shorter bow must have less power. A lighter draw weight must mean less penetration. And if European knights in full plate dominated battlefields, their armor must have rendered these Eastern weapons nearly useless. This belief feels intuitive. Movies show Crusaders shrugging off arrow volleys. Video games treat composite bows as starter weapons. The narrative writes itself: European steel versus Eastern wood and horn, no contest. But medieval combat didn't work that way. When Crusader armies marched into the Levant in the late 11th century, they expected to face what they knew. European war bows, typically longbows made from yew, required immense draw weights, often exceeding 100 pounds. They were effective, but they were also tall, heavy, and designed for infantry formations. European knights understood power through size and mass. The composite bow they encountered was different. Constructed from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, these bows were recurved, curving away from the archer when unstrung. This wasn't a design compromise. It was engineering. The horn compressed under enormous tension. The sinew stretched. The wood core held the structure together. When strung, the bow stored energy far beyond what its size suggested. Arab and Turkish composite bows averaged draw weights between 80 and 120 pounds, comparable to English longbows, but in a package half the length. This made them usable on horseback. It also made them faster to draw and release. On open terrain, against mounted archers who could loose arrows every few seconds while moving at speed, European knights faced a problem they hadn't anticipated. The battlefield wasn't a tournament ground. It was dust, heat, exhaustion, and distance. And distance was about to become the Crusaders' worst enemy. Picture yourself in full mail, perhaps with a coat of plates or early forms of hardened leather reinforcement. You're advancing on foot or mounted. The enemy is 600 feet away, well beyond the effective range of your crossbows, far outside the reach of your sword. You expect them to close the distance or retreat. They do neither. The composite bow's recurve design creates a mechanical advantage. As the archer draws, the string angle changes, effectively increasing leverage at full draw. This means the arrow accelerates faster over a shorter distance. The result: arrow velocities exceeding 150 feet per second. At 400 feet, a war arrow from a composite bow retains enough kinetic energy to penetrate mail. Here's what that means. Mail is effective against cuts and slashes. It distributes impact across interlocking rings. But it does not stop focused, perpendicular force. A bodkin point arrow, narrow, hardened, designed specifically to defeat armor, concentrates all its energy into a tip less than a quarter-inch wide. When it strikes mail at high velocity, the rings don't hold. They separate, bend, or break. The arrow punches through. And it doesn't stop at one volley. Mounted archers using composite bows could sustain rates of fire European forces couldn't match. While a crossbowman reloads, a skilled horse archer has already loosed 3 arrows. While a longbow repositions, the mounted archer has circled, fired, and withdrawn. Because of this, Crusader armies faced the problem of attrition they weren't equipped to solve. Each advance cost men. Each attempt to close distance exposed gaps in formation. And the arrows kept coming. If you're enjoying cutting through medieval myths like this, consider subscribing. Arms and Impact breaks down how weapons and armor actually worked, beyond the movies and into real combat. Now think about what happens when you do close the distance. The mounted archer doesn't stand and fight. He retreats. The composite bow's light weight and short length allow him to turn in the saddle, fire backward while riding away, the famous Parthian shot. You chase. You exhaust yourself. And when you slow, he turns, circles, and resumes fire. The myth that composite bows were weak collapses entirely when you examine the physics. Draw weight isn't the only factor. Energy storage, arrow velocity, and sustained fire rate matter just as much. A composite bow could deliver lethal force at ranges where European infantry had no answer. And it could do so repeatedly, from angles and distances that made conventional counterattacks impossible. This is why Crusader chroniclers described arrow storms, not skirmishes. This is why battles like Hattin in 1187 saw European heavy cavalry pinned, dehydrated, and decimated before close combat ever began. The composite bow didn't fail against armor. European assumptions about what constituted a real weapon failed against the composite bow. What this forced Crusaders to do was rethink mobility and protection. Full plate armor, solid, articulated steel covering the entire body, became more widespread in response to projectile threats. By the 13th and 14th centuries, European knights invested heavily in armor that could stop arrows entirely, not just deflect them. But plate armor brought its own costs: weight, expense, heat exhaustion in desert climates. Tactically, Crusader armies began adopting their own composite bows and training horse archers, though never with the same cultural emphasis or skill level as their eastern counterparts. They also shifted toward defensive engagements, using fortifications and crossbow-armed infantry to control space rather than charging into open terrain. The real solution wasn't more force. It was smarter use of terrain, combined arms, and recognizing that dominance in one type of warfare didn't guarantee dominance in another. The composite bow didn't just challenge European armor, it challenged European assumptions about how wars were supposed to be fought. The myth that composite bows were weak persists because we conflate size with power. We assume a shorter weapon must be inferior. We imagine medieval warfare through the lens of European sources, which rarely admitted the effectiveness of enemy technology. The historical truth is this: the composite bow was one of the most efficient weapons ever designed for mounted warfare. Its recurve geometry, laminated construction, and compatibility with high-speed cavalry tactics made it devastatingly effective against European armor, especially at ranges where retaliation was impossible. Crusaders didn't dismiss composite bows because they were weak. They dismissed them because they didn't understand the engineering. And by the time they did, the battlefield had already taught the lesson in blood. Understanding this matters because it reveals a broader truth about medieval combat. Effectiveness wasn't about brute strength or heavy weapons. It was about physics, tactics, and adaptation. The composite bow succeeded not despite its size, but because of its design. Arms and impact exists to cut through these myths and show how weapons actually worked, not how we assumed they did. If this changed how you see medieval weapons, hit like. What weapon or myth should we break next? Comment below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more weapons, armor, and battlefield reality.